Uh, Gosh, I am actually in Northern Virginia and just feeling very privileged and honored to be here. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Well, I am in Northern Colorado.
I wish.
Lisa's probably in New Jersey. Habib's in Pakistan. And anybody else? Mark is in Bangladesh. He also hasn't got his camera up. But we're excited to be able to chat with you. You have been on our board of advisors for some time now, and we appreciate that a lot. And I don't know that we'll really talk about that a lot unless you would like to, but this is just going to be an interview format today. And Mark, why don't you go ahead and start recording? All right. Hey, everybody. We're now recording. Those of you that were on here just a little earlier will have just heard us as we were being informal. But we're so privileged today to have Denisa Scott with us. Denisa is one of our board members, of our board of advisors for the EAT community and for Economic Action Team. And she and I have interacted just once before in that capacity, and she's actually been really great and answered a bunch of questions that we raise every quarter through our board process. And she's got a really interesting career herself that we're going to just chat about today. So this is just going to be an interview format. There's no planned presentation. We're going to go back and forth between Mark showing her website and some other things that are related to her, and then just having us all be on the screen and showing it that way. So if you've got questions, you guys know that on the right-hand side of your screen, you can put them in. We would really love to have them. We'll stay plenty busy asking her questions ourselves, but we'd really rather have yours. So put them in there, put them in the little box that says questions, or raise your hand. Mark will see it, and then he'll acknowledge you, and you can come on and ask them live if you'd like. So anyway, that's a little bit of our introduction. And let's just start with a real broad question, hopefully a simple one. Just tell us a little bit about your professional life, your sort of history and what you've done, Denisa.
Well, okay. Excuse me. Your organization was really interesting to me because I have always been a tree hugger at heart and started out as a career tree hugger. I was doing environmental sustainability studies, think on the order of, say, the Amazon rainforest, looking at environmental sustainability in the context of economic development. And, rather than cut all the trees down, what can we do to create a viable economy that also supports biodiversity and conservation. And I got a call one day from my advisor from grad school, and she basically said, ecosystems, space systems, what do you care? Will you come work for me? I thought that was really interesting. And so I went to work for an aerospace-based contractor and have been supporting, space-based programs ever since. Mostly from the perspective that, if we can understand what's going on the surface of the planet, we can better adjust our meta behaviors to support a viable, sustainable Earth. And so I've done that for 25 years, working with various constellations and whatnot. And I have it's all well and good and a lot of fun. And as I get a little older and wiser, as you understand much better than I, it's really ultimately about the people. And so engaging in a community like this, engaging on programs, sharing our ideas, sharing what works and what doesn't, and understanding that there's a balance, I think, between the, live simply so that others may simply live philosophy. Excuse me, I have that's Northern Virginia in the
that happens.
Summer. You end up with a few tadpoles in your throat. So there's a balance between the philosophy of live simply so that others may simply live, and let's use high tech to solve the major environmental problems of the planet and to gain better insight. So I'm just trying to explore as much of that humanocracy as possible right now.
With Advisory Cloud, which is where we met for the board circumstance you're on, are you on any other boards? And if so, what are the generalities of those companies and how do you help them work?
Well, I'm on the boards of two other corporations that are, one is specific to blockchain technologies, and one is a space company. So again, it's I find the nexus between human interaction and human solutions to human and environmental problems and technology, and how we can leverage it to best address really pressing problems as just sort of the sweet spot where I'm just trying to explore, and really enjoying listening to, especially with your guests, what are they dedicating their lives to? How are they trying to make a difference in, sustainable agriculture and beekeeping and all these other wonderful topics that you've been able to feature.
Awesome. By the way, everybody can see it's lunchtime here in Colorado early, and it's later in the East Coast. And so we're enjoying talking. While in my case, I'm munching on a little sandwich and drinking a little juice as we go. And we'd like you to get comfortable. Again, please ask questions as we go along. Because of the interview format, if they're relevant, Mark, would you make sure you look for them? I am really intrigued for a different reason than you might think about your career and what you do. Because you'd have to look a little more into my history, but my dad was an aerospace engineer. He came out of World War II as a pilot in the Army Air Corps, and instead of staying in, which many times I know he regretted, he wished he would have stayed in, but he didn't. Anyway, he went to work right out of the military with North American. North American was acquired by Rockwell, and ultimately Rockwell was acquired by Boeing during his career. So he was in Wichita, Kansas at that time, and very, very soon after he got hired, they moved him, transferred him to Lancaster, Palmdale, Edwards Air Force Base. So he started being a test pilot at the same time that Chuck Yeager did, at the same time as Neil Armstrong did, at the same time as these are all guys that are friends of his. And I was fortunate in that Neil Armstrong lived right behind us, literally in the house that backed up to ours.
Yes.
Chuck Yeager lived down the street. My dad, if he would have been a Vietnam veteran, they would have diagnosed him with PTSD because he just wasn't the same guy. I'm told. I was born after that, but my mother said he just went inside. Well, Yeager and Armstrong were just the opposite. Those two guys could talk your ear off. They would be very outgoing. So when my dad got with them, he was able to be, really much more of himself. And I would sort of hide behind things and listen to my dad talking with those two guys and others. And that really was the real him, not necessarily the one I saw all the time. But anyway, he flew for the rest of his career till he retired from the flying side, F-105s, F-1s, F-100s, you name it, in test flights, leading up to the end of his career working on the second stage of the Saturn before going back to the airplane side and working on the B-1 as they were getting the B-1 developed. And I don't know if you remember, but we tried to develop a plane called the B-70 that was going to replace the B-52 that North America built. We only built 3 of them. And Dad was flying an F-105 doing observation when one of the 3 crashed. And it hit the F-105 that was on the other side because of the prop or wash and air wash. Anyway, the 2 of them both went down. And that day I was in school, I think in 7th grade, and I got called to the principal's office, and my mom was there crying, and the only thing we'd heard is there was a crash, and my dad was one of the pilots that was out that day. And we literally waited until he walked in the door that evening before we knew he was alive still. So communication wasn't quite then what it is today. But I grew up in the aerospace industry, and probably because of that, decided I didn't want to go in it myself, even though a whole bunch of my friends, my dad worked, 80, 100-hour weeks.
Right. Yes.
His whole career.
The interesting thing about those experimental planes is there was so much of the so much development of the early electro-optical observation platforms that have really turned out to be quite instrumental. I mean, right now we're getting, I think I saw a news story just this morning about how satellite imagery, commercial satellite imagery is showing the canals in the Ukraine drying up as a result of the dam that was breached. And so often we can see, using this very high altitude or space-based imagery, the impact of very anthropogenic activities. And it really, I think, adds a lot of gravitas to claims of being in the Anthropocene era and all the things that a lot of people will deny and say, well, we've had variations in climate over the eons, and it can't be humans because we probably have about the impact of ants, except for the fact that now human-made materials and buildings and other stuff now outweighs the entire biomass of all of the other living organisms on the planet. So, take that as you will. I tend to think it lends some credence to the case of the Anthropocene era being upon us.
Tell us about one thing you're interested in that it's exciting to me, which is space mining. And I asked Mark yesterday and Arib to make sure I was getting it right, and then I did some more research, but that truly means mining maybe on an asteroid or on another planet. It doesn't mean like Bitcoin mining where it's using computers. It's truly mining. So tell us about what your interests are there. Where are we at in terms of maybe getting there to being able to be doing that? How far off is that?
I think that the very first, again, this is going to be according to the news headlines. I think I saw it on spacenews.com or something like that yesterday, that NASA has approved the very first commercial mission, US-based commercial mission, to a near-Earth object called Psyche. I think it's Psyche 17, Psyche, whatever. But it's a near-Earth object, an asteroid, that by conservative estimates has something on the order of 10 quintillion or 10 quadrillion, I'm going to have to look that up, dollars worth of rare earths and other mineable materials in it. That is enough to cut a check to every single human on the planet for $1 billion and still have plenty left over. So one of the things that I have long since said is that the very first state or non-state entity, corporation, whatever, that reaches and successfully mines a near-Earth object, an asteroid, will be the next and last superpower on the planet, because you're talking one rock in space having the mineable value of multiple times over the entire planet's GDP.
So just so people can get a context, one element that I at least heard about that would be very valuable on any of these would be lithium, because lithium is so really unavailable in mineable quantities here on Earth. Just so, is that right? I mean, that is one of them.
Yes, in any of the rare earths. Now, I'm sure you've seen also articles on the media about, you know, China and other countries, mostly China, trying to corner the market for rare earth metals, rare earth elements, and how important the rare earths are in all the electronics that we depend on, whether it's your GPS, your cell phone, your smartwatch, your kid's iPad, all of those electronics that we take for granted, and literally they're just throwaway items now, pretty much. They're disposable. You have a tablet for 18 months and it's considered ancient and you just toss it. Well, that's all well and good, except for the fact that inside each of those individual electronics is a plethora of rare earth that make all this go, make all the electrons move from point A to point B very rapidly, and be able to, you know, receive satellite signals in a form factor that's, you know, the size of your hand or a deck of cards, or even the size of a watch. And deconstructing those disposable electronics, and I call them disposables because that people throw them away as commonly as plastic bottles now, just about. Deconstructing that is extremely difficult, extremely hazardous. There's high toxicity in the process. Usually it happens in underdeveloped countries that, and it's being done by people with no safety training whatsoever, and they suffer high exposure to very toxic materials, and, you know, their incidence of, you know, cancers and other diseases that are entirely preventable is just insane. And we are consuming these rare earths at unprecedented levels at this point, to the point that now there's even companies that are trying to mine the deep sea floor for rare earth elements. And so the idea of being able to mine what we perceive as just lifeless rocks in space is very intriguing to people. And it's also, go ahead.
Oh, well, let's just take an asteroid. Let's take the one you described. How, because I just think people, we all have in mind the planets. We know the sun's distance, the moon distance. How far away relative to one of the other planets would an asteroid that you could get to and mine be?
Well, from a time to travel perspective, it would be a matter of months. So, and these are also the same rocks in space that people, you know, that you see all these movies about, space cowboys, whatever, you know, what happened if the giant asteroid hit Earth, and, you know, life would be over as we know it, sort of thing. So, but their orbits will, the perigee to Earth is periodic, and then they go way off into deep space again, and then they come back and they go out. So it's, there are specific windows where it's more or less efficient or more or less viable to consider approaching these things. But, you know, the Japanese have already brought back samples from an asteroid, and the comparative estimates are very favorable to these 10 quadrillion dollars worth of raw materials estimates that we're getting off of some of these various rocks. And it's really interesting, except
aren't we there technologically? I mean, what would we have to be able to do this? It's truly an approval process and coupled with financial, right? I mean, we don't need to improve technology probably in any way, do we?
Well, there's always improvements that are needed, and one of them is, when you get to these distances, the very fact of just the physics of how fast and far radio waves travel for communication, command and control of an autonomous vehicle traveling to an asteroid to mine it. That's where I'm guessing that the AI comes in, because that vehicle's not going to be able to wait 8+ hours or 3 days to get instructions if it runs into trouble. So it's literally going to have to make its own decisions. On top of that, if you can imagine a space tug that's just got a fresh load of material off of a space rock, and it's headed back towards Earth to orbit and sync up with some commercial space station to have its payload taken off to be processed, whatever. And that payload the payload alone could be worth, $100 billion. Now, this is total swag, so don't quote me on this, but to think that, if you look at the ultimate value of that anyone's pinned on a rock, and then say somebody comes and takes a big scoopful and goes back to a space station to process that material. So you've got your giant coal car, only it's not coal, it's got molybdenum and titanium and lithium and all of these materials that are crucial for electronics production and all the things that make modern life possible for us today. Well, it's going to be worse than the gold rush of 49 when it comes to the bandits and the everything that want to go steal that, right? So then you can think of, potentially, other kinds of spacecraft that are rogue spacecraft coming in and bumping off the whatever vehicle is towing that giant space barge full of materials and stealing it. So that's something that people come and ask me about quite a bit, and commercial industry is going to have to start thinking about that. And what happens? You're too far away to come home and say, hey, mother, may I? Is it fight or flight? Well, if you fight, you might be starting a world war. If you try to flee, well, where are you going to flee to? That the bandits on their space horses can't chase you down and go ahead and steal your load anyway. So it's a fascinating problem, and there's space law and policy and commercial precedent and all sorts of things to be considered.
Where are countries of the world in relative order? This is asking for Denise's opinion, and if you have any references, this would be great, but you don't need to. Where are they at in terms of their relative order of sophistication? I would bet that X number of years ago, that was a very easy question. It would be US, Russia, China, maybe. I wouldn't even have put Japan in the mix, but I don't understand Japan. So is it sort of even in the space race today between different countries? Is there somebody that's way ahead? Are the Chinese like way out there ahead? And maybe we don't know these things. Maybe this is the thing that whoever our governments are keeps these things quiet too.
Interestingly enough, I don't think focusing on, the various countries that have already achieved spaceflight is so much what's fascinating as the progress, the commercial companies out there
Sure.
that are doing what used to be strictly the realm of governments.
Right.
And have the
Well,
SpaceXs and
Right.
Blue Origins. You have the companies of the world, but there's not just 3 or 4 of them. There's literally scores of them now that are.
But, I mean, obviously they are even just the two you mentioned. I think if you were in China, you would call both those companies non-Chinese. Okay, SpaceX would be considered a U.S. based company. Blue Origins is what, maybe UK. I don't even know if he is UK really, what he associates with, but because I wish we could take and say that we have this global peace and that that companies are gonna get, but I don't think we have that. And there was a space race while I was growing up. Clearly, we were in competition with the Russians. Maybe now the space race is commercial, and that
I think it is.
that Musk is in competition with all the others that are out there.
I really do think it's a commercial, and that's the beauty of it. Why did NASA exist in the first place? To subsidize this technology area and the industry itself until it could become a viable commercial industry in and of itself. And it's almost succeeded that, if not actually. I mean, really, the space industry is a viable, independent, commercially driven industry now, whereas even 15 years ago, it wasn't yet. And
what is one or two, if you have any success stories of really young companies that nobody on here will have ever heard of, maybe, but that are making it? And what is it in today's world that would typically allow that to happen? Investors, mental power, or is it a combination of both?
well, it really seems to be driven by a visionary entrepreneur. I mean, you've got, and of course, I've never been good with proper nouns, so you're putting me on the spot to say name a company. You've got, that there are so many commercial satellite companies out there that are providing sensor data that we never would have imagined. You can buy almost anything that used to be the exclusive purview of governments. You got imagery that has, that's just got exquisite, a very, very exquisite resolution. And, you can just go right, what is it, global, oh shoot, what did they become? I have to look it up. Anyway, you've got these wonderful companies that are providing imagery, that are providing even, space-based, other kinds of sensors, whether it's in other parts of the visual spectrum, or if it's radar or various kinds of communications. You've got your Starlinks of the world that have just gotten out there. The interesting thing is now it's not so much a question of can we get up there, but now the problem is space traffic management. And the big push now is to create, just like there's the air traffic control, now the governments and commercial companies are having to come together to create a space traffic control. And which U.S. agency is going to be the lead on that? How are we going to interact with all of the other space-enabled countries in the world? I mean, and what is it doing to our night sky? Can you do the dark skies concept anymore? You can't even look up in the sky with a telescope now and have a clear view. There are so many mega constellations up there in low Earth orbit, and not to mention, MEO or HEO. And what that's leading to, of course, is the space debris problem. And there are a lot of companies working in the space, working in resolving space debris. And I myself have a proposal going into the National Science Foundation to deal with space debris, hopefully, orbit a space debris mitigation technology. The interesting thing there is that the commercial companies that are out there still think that space debris is everyone's problem, therefore it must be the government's problem. The government needs to solve this problem for us, is what you're hearing in industry. You can have clouds of debris that are anything from the size of a grain of sand, and there's hundreds and thousands, if not millions of pieces of this up there, putting all of these satellites at risk. But any one satellite, it's sort of the amortization of risk, and they spread it around. Any one satellite is not very likely to get taken out, but every now and then you'll have something that gets taken out that's a multi-million-dollar commercial satellite, and then everybody gets up in arms again. So just like any emergent industry, these issues sort of do the 2 steps forward, 1 step back progression until it matures into established policy, established space law, established diplomatic ties, and what to do in space if the bad thing happens and a French satellite takes out a Russian satellite. What happens when it was just an accident? Well, if they're both commercial companies, who pays for it? What does Lloyd's of London do? There's so many questions that have yet to be answered.
How much space activity do you think goes on that the public has no knowledge of? And that's very intentional. Either intentional on the part of the corporations, the businesses that are involved, or on the governments. Is it a lot? Is it just not much because of the visibility of everything it has today? My gut would tell me it's a lot. My gut would tell me we as the public don't have a clue about what all is going on.
Well, I mean, there's hobbyists that the only thing that they do is sit around. They sit up late at night out in a field with their telescope and say, "Oh gosh, I haven't seen that one before. There's a thing going over that isn't cataloged." I mean, there's whole catalogs of space satellites and whatnot, and I'm going to get you the website. The spacetrack.org is a really good. It's a completely.
Mark, would you do me a favor and pull spacetrack.org up and take our pictures and put them in smaller? By the way, I'm going to interrupt real quick. We got audience out there that are being really quiet, not asking questions. I know that I have multiple staff members that are going to ask you a bunch of questions tonight. So that I know Lisa's got some. I know that Aaron's got some. I know that Mark and Reed. But I really want our audience to. So audience, please, this is an amazing topic, and it's very economic. So please, if you would, raise your hand and ask some questions. And by the way, Denisa and I could probably talk for days, and we'd never run out of things to talk
I'm
about.
sure we could.
Back to, again, sort of what's going on today. If I was an 18-year-old wanting to go into the space industry, what would be my best approach to do that? And let me give you what I mean by that is, are there some colleges that are way ahead of others that I might want to try to get into, colleges or universities? Are there internship programs that I would maybe want to try to get into if I could? Let's say I had my parents don't work in the space industry. I don't have any real connections.
Right.
What are some things I could do to really enhance my ability to have a career? And then what would I want to take as a major? That's what would be the
That's
best?
kind of funny too, because Wayne, I'm a biologist by training. I did my undergraduate degree in pre-veterinary medicine with a minor in genetics. So asking me that question is kind of funny because really it was doing, straight up tree hugger work. Now I suppose I was a little bit of an anomaly, but the STEM subjects, and there's always going to be a place for specialists. There's always going to be a place for generalists. There's also this intersection where the translational technology topics, where how does microbiology meet space? Well, they're trying to grow lettuce in space, and there's a lot of intricacies for that. So if you are a biologist, or a true agrarian at heart, there's still a place for you, because I'm like a lot of people. I believe that probably one of our best chances for survival is to get off planet. So, and I'm a child of the Star Trek era. I'll own that. But I really do believe that we are fundamentally explorers. We are, as humans, we are creatures that must go out and explore and seek out strange new worlds and all that stuff. And yes, this planet is amazing and beautiful and it by definition is unique, but it's possibly not unique to the capacity of supporting life forms as we know it. But we're just now starting to understand that there are so many different recombinants of conditions that could support life forms as we don't know it. But even here on this planet, there are extremophiles that survive and thrive in, super deep ocean vents that are super saturated with sulfur, or some chemical that is volcanic in nature. And it's only been within the last several decades that people have realized that there are, prokaryotes, eukaryotes, various bacteria, prions. We have no idea what the ecosystem of prions is, because we can't even define it yet, other than it's a haploid strand of DNA that's self-replicating. So we really don't have a clue as to the spectrum of life as it is possible across the universe,
Right.
much less whether it would be sentient or something we could communicate with. I'm thinking of the Orson Scott Card, series, Ender's Game, and actually grok that each the other is sentient and self-aware and has something to communicate and interests to protect. And there might, I don't know whether, if there were aliens, would they be friendly or not? That's an ongoing question. But what I do know is that unless we continue to explore and find ways to do it in a way that's sustainable for this planet. You know, we're at a tipping point, or that we could either take the biotic potential of this planet out as we take ourselves out, or we could rise above the very primitive fight or flight instincts that everything down to the tiniest single-celled organism has. We could rise above it and become, truly more humane humans, and aspire to space.
Zach is out in the audience and has a great question, but I'm going to ask him for a little clarification because I'm seeing it and I'm going to ask it directly, but then Zach, I might ask you to clarify a little bit. So he says, hi, I am a soil microscopist and a worm farmer in New Jersey. Are there any, and here's the question, are there any concerns looking at soil microbiology in terms of its significance in space? And then he says the moon, asteroids, or Mars. As I hear that, I'm not quite getting what you might be asking. So maybe Denisa did, but maybe clarify that a little bit. So because I don't know what you mean about concerns, Zach. Meaning, are the concerns that that space is affecting our worm technology, our worms, or is there something we can go up into space and do? I don't know, but maybe you've got some thoughts, Denisa, before Zach starts to think of maybe how to clarify his question.
Well, there's been a lot of study already into, how could we farm on the moon? Is the soil that we find, is the substrate that we find on the surface of the moon something that could support agriculture? And the short answer is we don't know. There's also the concern of, could there be microbes in the subsurface structures, geological structures of any given planet that we might disrupt or potentially annihilate if we tried to introduce Earth origin soil constituents, or tried to farm, because it's impossible to produce any kind of agricultural product in a truly sterile environment. Something's got to be allowed to grow.
He clarified his question, by the way, and I think he's actually wanting to know, are there companies out there that are interested in this, so that it isn't just companies that want to occupy the moon and come up with whatever minerals there might be, or an asteroid. Are there companies that you know of, at least, that are actually doing some movement, research, whatever, to see about the worms in space, and how that might affect what we do, what we have here on the Earth?
Well, I don't have a comprehensive knowledge of all of the commercial space companies out there and what they're doing. But I do know, like, for instance, Elon Musk with his push to Mars sort of thing, there's been he's put a lot of money into figuring out how we would farm fresh food on Mars. I'm sure a simple Google search would reveal the names of a number of companies that are probably pushing initiatives in space agriculture. And right now the focus is on hydroponics, or a gel-based hydroponic growth medium for human comestibles. But there's been, the idea of terraforming Mars that's been around, God, since I was a little kid. And basically,
how much food is grown in the space station? Any kind of a place where humans are living up in space? Are they doing aquaponics or hydroponics, or not, probably not aquaponic, but any growth of food up there, or is it all brought to them?
I did read something about the resident astronauts having tasted lettuce that was grown in a gel-based hydroponic experimental cell, but this is all still experimental. It's not sustainable. It requires decades of research to understand, what are the genetic changes to the base plant itself when it's grown in space. Does it change it somehow so that the metabolites would not be compatible with the human digestive process? Would it, is there something that could go wrong that could, poison humans if they ate lettuce that was grown in space versus lettuce or spinach that was grown on the ground? Or does it become a superfood? Or what are the benefits of growing in space versus growing on the ground? And so I do know that there are astronauts who have lettuce that has been grown in space, but it was pretty much a publicity stunt. But
what are some biological kinds of things that you personally, if you could look ahead 10 years into your life, and if you had a chance to do whatever you might want career-wise moving ahead, are there some specific biological kinds of things you'd be interested in exploring as it relates to space? That's a tough one. I know. I apologize, but that's.
It is a really tough one, and I'm going to deflect you a little bit and just say that there are companies that are looking not just to manufacture living facilities and goods in space for space use, but there are also companies that are looking to create pharmaceuticals in space that could not be created on the Earth, that would have medicinal value, that could be a game changer for various ailments.
Give me an example of that. That's a one that is something.
Okay, well, give me 2 seconds. I'm going to look that one up for the specifics, because being on a live stream and getting put on the spot, that sort of thing.
No, and again, it's more. And maybe the reasons why. In other words, would it be lack of gravity? Would there be things that would be able to be better? I mean, what would be the reasons that doing something like a pharmaceutical development in space could be something you wouldn't be able to do here?
Right. So actually, even so, I'm looking at an article out of the Scientist magazine from back in 2020. It says, major pharma companies since have for a number of years. There's a company quoted here, Lambda Vision, that had been spent years developing a protein-based artificial retina that went up to the ISS with the proteins that could make that retina. And I expect that the value of having that those grow in space would be you'd have a more uniform distribution and come up with a more viable shape than you might get on the ground where there's gravity. You've got Eli Lilly, Merck, AstraZeneca, dozens of companies that have all sent.
So the big companies, they're doing it. So they've got thought. Because I guess I could see in certain circumstances you could have incredibly clean air that you wouldn't be able to create here on Earth. You couldn't even think about filtering, so you couldn't do the best HEPA filters available. You couldn't get the air quality good enough that it would approach what it could be in a space environment. I could see that would be.
Sorry to cut you guys in, but I'd also want to show this trailer here, which we have for Denisa. I have already this will be a YouTube channel which Denisa will be launching. Yeah, so we have like 10, 15 minutes left, so I wanted to bring this in first. So we
Oh, well,
can
go
talk
for
about
it.
it.
Go for it, Arib, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
Yes, here you go.
He's gonna play the video. Go ahead, Arib.
There's no sound to it.
Yeah, Arib, we need to get sound. Arib.
Okay,
I
there
think
should
my
be
sound
some.
is gonna be
Wind it
important.
back there.
Uh,
He's actually highlighting. I've got a YouTube channel that's going to. It's not public yet. I'm going to make it live on the 3rd of July.
Ah,
And
okay.
this is more. No.
So he's giving a preview of it. We're getting a preview of it.
So
Still
this
don't
is
have any sound, Arib.
this is the trailer, and it's called Over the Hill and Into the Wild, because I am a little older now, but I did spend the first major chunk of my life living and working in the wilderness. So instead of continuing to promote my career in space, I kind of decided that I wanted to branch out a little bit and explore the more human side of people and their experiences with the earth and their impact to environmental topics that matter, and how being in the great outdoors has impacted their lives, and just sharing basically the wisdom and knowledge of, pardon my French, but other kick-ass women that are a little bit older. And so that's my YouTube channel. He was going to try and show you. It's called Over the Hill and Into the Wild. So I will be branching out more in my career, but not further into space, instead going back into.
Well, let's stay on that one now. Let's move there. Now we're getting an area that I have some experience in. And
Yes.
I have it from both the gray hair, which means over the hill side, but
Yeah.
I've spent my whole life being out in the wild in one way or another. And that's probably what it's where I feel the most comfortable. What is the way that this entity will generate some kind of revenue, just so that it becomes economic, right? So you can stay afloat. Will you be doing tours? Will you have courses? And what is it that it'll be doing?
I may be able to add some courses and that sort of thing, but this little YouTube channel is kind of a hobby project of mine, because I have spent so many years working in high tech, so many years working in the aerospace industry, trying to impact things that will make the earth better. But I was a mounted ranger with the U.S. Forest Service. I did deep winter technical mountain search and rescue. I was a firefighter. I did a lot of ranch work. I did a lot of dude work. I did a lot of, which is basically taking dudes out on horseback rides into the wilderness. I did a lot of, I worked as the senior naturalist on a 3,000-acre African wildlife reserve in central Texas for some time. And so I've got the bona fides that I really have and can go out into the wild and live and survive. But I also want to focus on women's stories and the beauty and wisdom that they've acquired over the years. It's not, worse for the wear, it's wiser for the wear. And going out into the wilderness, kind of Bear Grylls style, only without the Hollywood stunts, and just communing with nature and talking about their lives and experiences. And most of my guests to date, and you'll see as I publish the episodes, have a very economics-based interest. There's one of my guests is one of the owners of Arterra Winery, and we talk a lot about how they are using sustainable practices to grow their grapes and still be symbiotic with the local native environment and promoting its health, and also creating a viable business model where they have some really, really amazing wines and that sort of thing. another woman who runs a horse rescue, and it's on a farm where they're working to create a very eco-friendly environment while they are supporting all of these rescue animals and that sort of thing. So I have sort of branched out a little bit from space, and well, I guess I'm putting more earthbound roots down rather than branching up to space.
What's your observation of women that you would put into that category? So I'm not going to put an age on it or whatever. I'll let you think of, whatever that might be, about how as women age, would they become more sedentary than men might as they age? I can make observations about men because, one, I am one. Most of my really close friends that are my age or even a little younger, certainly older, have become way too sedentary in their older age. And I'm talking about ones that at some point were very active out in the outdoors or whatever. But just, I mean, it's scary to me how little that a bunch of my friends do anything other than sit and watch TV.
Right. So Wayne, so this is part of the idea is, a lot of people may not have the confidence that they can get out there and do these things because they don't know how to hike in the woods, or they don't know which way end of a backpack is up or whatever. But I'm really trying to encourage people, and women primarily, but anyone, just to get out there and enjoy the outdoors, because the more you have a connection with nature and the more you have a connection with wilderness, the more it comes home to roost how important it is to live a life that's gentle on the earth. And so somebody's activity level now shouldn't determine whether or not they're even willing to get out and try. And in whatever capacity they can, whether it's sitting in a canoe, just, paddling gently down a river, or getting out. Gosh, I had my hand's still healing from a BMX bike accident a couple of months ago. So
what are you doing riding a BMX bike? Do you have grandkids or kids or whatever that are BMX racers?
I have a young son, very young son. He's just going into 3rd grade. So
you should recommend a movie for him, by the way. Very old school. It's called RAD. So RAD. And it was probably made in the 80s. And I'm sure it would be available, some streaming things, Netflix, whatever. I know the guy who starred in that, the guy that was because my son raced BMX for his time, and my son's 47 now. So he started when he was 4 and raced through 15 or so, 13. He moved in from BMX to mountain bikes, and then mountain bikes to road bikes. But very serious. We went all over the country to BMX races. And this guy who made this movie, Rad, and it's not the best cinematography type of movie, but it's all about BMX. I guarantee your son and you would love it. So it's called RAD. I can't remember whether it's RADD. Seems like it is, or just RAD, but there won't be more than one movie about BMX that's called RAD. But just
I'll look it up.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So what
End of our time?
does he race, or does he just mess around with it?
Oh no, we're just getting our feet wet. We're just getting our feet wet. So.
And does he like doing tricks more, or going fast and going over bumps and jumping and whatever?
He likes both. He's
Ah,
been a little speed demon, but he really likes the tricks. He thinks that's just cool.
there you go. Very good. I have some old videos sometime I'll dust off of my son racing when he was at that age. Somehow put him out there, share him, whatever. On your website, going back to the YouTube site, make sure we stay in touch, and we'll make sure to advertise once you've got it. So July 3rd, you're talking about?
July 3rd, I hope to go public with Over the Hill and Into the Wild.
Okay. And here it is, everybody.
Well, thank you.
But can people subscribe now? I think they probably can. You can.
I just did.
I think so, yes.
I just did, and you need to click on this bell icon too. So you'll get all the notifications.
See, I'm still learning about all of that. I just decided I really wanted to get out and talk to really wonderful women, and this was a great place to put it, to share for all the world to see. So I'm still learning about all of that.
And we did just pass the top of the hour, and
Okay.
we try to be respectful of both you and our speakers, but then our guests. But let me just do this. We're going to stay on a little bit longer here. Zach had a funny one after his two questions, but he said, if there's no plants, I'm assuming, this is plants out in space, I'm assuming there's no soil food web. And then he goes, ha, 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 which is probably true. There's, but anyway, any other questions? Everybody, staff, you guys didn't ask anything. Arib did, you made a comment. Lisa, Aaron, Mark, Arib, guys, throw something out there.
Well, I've not been involved with the James Webb Telescope project. I've followed it like so many other people have. What's fascinating is that it's so much more powerful than the Hubble, and we're being able to see, and this is a hard concept to grok for some people, but see that much further back in time and look at the evolution of the universe and understand more about how planets and galaxies, etc., came into being. And from that perspective, I think it gives us an opportunity to become much more open and sensitive to the possibilities, the world, the possibility of what might be out there that we haven't even conceived of yet. And potentially finding planets that are very similar to the Earth in its composition. And, they talk about the Goldilocks zone, having a planet be so far away from its sun that it orbits that it would be within the temperature ranges that support life as we know it, potentially support human life, because we have very, very small tolerances of temperature and atmospheric makeup and all sorts of things. So it's really exciting to think that we could examine hundreds of thousands of more potential star systems and the planets that are within them very rapidly. And as AI evolves, we can potentially train AIs to be looking for the things that, it's very hard when you're a human. You've got about 45 good minutes in you at any given time of serious focused attention on some kind of observation task. So no matter how interested you are as an astronomer or planetary observer, you're just going to fatigue. It's just part of the human neurology. You fatigue. And so when you have, AIs that can look at certain characteristics and do compare and contrast between what they've observed to what we know supports life, we have a lot better chance of finding star systems and planets that could support human-like life. And that's
is that the most powerful telescope in the world today, the James Webb, or is there others that are up?
To my knowledge, that's the most powerful deep space telescope there are, and there are no telescopes on the Earth's surface that could surpass it simply because there's atmospheric
Pollution. Yeah.
limited to, you know, where the Earth goes and where the Earth turns.
Right.
Whereas,
Right.
you know,
Another question from our audience, actually from a couple different people, but this is one which is that space radiation can be intense. How will people handle it?
well, we've already seen that, you know, people can't. We have to have protection. We have to have artificial structures that will protect our bodies, our brains, and the food we eat from space radiation. If it weren't for the atmosphere we have, if something ripped the atmosphere off of this planet, not only would we asphyxiate, but we'd also die most gauche of radiation poisoning. I mean, so again, humans are incredibly fragile, and our best bet is to be able to leverage the orbital technologies in manufacturing to create livable artificial environments, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. Again, staff or audience, because there's great questions here. Anything else from any of you guys? Denisa,
Yes,
I
sir.
have my last one here, and we'll wait. Will you come on again?
Yep.
And relatively soon, even, because I think there's just so much more that we can promote and then talk about. You know, I'm talking 3 months from now, 6 months or something. So not years off. Okay.
Right, I'd love to. That would be absolutely lovely. And
Well, after your YouTube channel gets going here.
I'll probably hit you.
Any other questions from the audience? We are going on over time.
Okay.
Yeah, this
I
is
don't have
Lisa.
any question.
No questions, but I think this has been a really interesting conversation. Denisa, you've given us lots of food for thought. I have a new perspective on space exploration and how it can benefit the ecology and how we look at ourselves as humans. I'm going to turn my camera on because I'm speaking a little bit more than I was expecting to. So I just really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your concepts and connections and how you've connected a lot of dots and opened my eyes to concepts that are new to me. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Lisa.
I think that Lisa's perspective there is probably held by many. I don't think most of the things you talked about, Denisa, sort of the average, even well-aware economic human would have knowledge of it. Really wouldn't. I mean, I don't think they think about space as how it might be impacting so much of what we do on the Earth in the way you discussed it. So it was really useful.
Well, there's just such a broad spectrum of opportunities and impacts. So it just never hurts to explore.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your perspective of how if we can take this information and how can we make us better humans? How can we make our humanity more human? So
and I think that
really resonated with me.
Reed?
Yeah, so no questions here, but I really want to mention one thing. Whenever your YouTube channel is there and it's launched, please send me one email. We will try to promote it on our own channel here. We will be putting the link on the website with this replay, and we would love to have you on for that one also. We will only talk about the YouTube channel. It was wonderful having you.
I'll talk about anything Wayne wants to talk about. We're good. I got you.
I told you I've seen Wayne 4 hours talking straight, and I think you have that caliber also.
Yes, I can talk incessantly. There you go. I'll own that.
It's not just talking, they're interesting. It's an interesting give and take dialogue. So it's very interesting to listen to. Thank you.
I'm gonna end it with one and make this a 20-second answer because it's really why Denisa versus Denisa. Was that, that it could be pronounced. Did you just take it on very early in life, or where did you?
It's an old family name. Many generations ago, before the branch of my family from which the name comes moved to Texas, I'm 5th generation Texan, thank you. But they were from Kentucky. And they were literate, but they didn't have anyone to teach them how to pronounce the words they read. So the French Denise became Denisa, and Louise became Louisa. It's literally just Kentuckified French.
That makes sense. Well, Mark, why don't you take us out? Denisa, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been wonderful. Y'all take care.